Fantastic. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Thursday, December 12th, 2024 Marin Wildfire Operations Committee meeting. And we are coming to you from 1600 Los Gamos Drive. Any interested member of the public can participate via Zoom or telephonically by utilizing the link or dial-in information listed on this agenda. If any member of the public has a request for reasonable accommodation or accommodation for assessing the meeting due to a disability, he, she, they should contact MWPA at info@marinwildfire.org. So we're calling the meeting to order. It looks like it is 10:06. Can I get a roll call, please?
Yes. Bolinas Fire District. City of Santa Fe. Here. Kentfield Fire. Here. Nevada Fire District.
Here.
Stinson Beach Fire.
Here.
Town of Ross.
Here.
City of Larkspur. County of Marin. Marinwood.
Here.
Sleepy Hollow. Town of Corte Madera.
Here.
Town of San Anselmo. City of Mill Valley. Inverness Fire District. Muir Beach. Southern Marin Fire. Town of Fairfax.
Here.
Can we just confirm that that is a quorum, please? Okay, quorum has been established. Thank you. Any agenda adjustments?
Nothing from staff.
Okay, thank you very much. So now it's time for public comment, open time for public expression. The public is welcome to address the Operations Committee at this time on matters not on the agenda that are within the jurisdiction of the committee. Please be advised that pursuant to the government code, the committee is not permitted to discuss or take action on any matter that is not on the agenda. Comments may be no more than 2 minutes and should be respectful to the committee. Please silence your cell phones during the meeting. Mute your microphone when not reporting out. Do we have any public comment?
If there are any members of the public who would like to speak on items currently not on the agenda, please raise your hand in the reactions. For those joining by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself. There are no raised hands this time.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to item number 5, Planning and Program Managers Report.
Great. Good morning. I'm just going to share my screen. Great. So I'm going to take a moment and just provide some updates in terms of what we've been up to for the last few months. This Operations Committee has not met since May or June of 2024, and we've been busy. So I want to provide a quick overview of some things that we've been up to that are relevant to all of you in the room. And also I want to thank those of you who were able to join in person, and thank those who were able to join online today. And welcome to our first Operations Committee meeting of the season. So one of the big things that we have taken on this year is creating a vegetation management public-facing web map. This was a big goal of ours, really creating something that's public-facing and shows what we're doing and where in terms of vegetation management. So this was a big one for us. Developing the GIS program is kind of correlated to this. We worked with Green Info Network and developed a program, protocols, a place to store all that data, and we've been working with the member agencies to develop that. So this vegetation management web map is for core veg management projects, so primarily shaded fuel breaks, work along roads as well as shaded fuel breaks, and related projects, really the core projects, and these are Measure C funded projects. So there are other activities going on in the county that aren't at this time shown on this map. We're going to make sure, we've indicated that on the map online, but we're going to make sure it's loud and clear for members of the public when they're taking a look at this. And I want to make sure to show you where to find this. So I'm going to stop my screen share and take you just very briefly online so you know where to find it. And those listening online can find it as well. So hopefully, there we go. Okay, so this takes us to our homepage. And if you just click on projects, kind of the middle upper half of the website, you scroll down to veg management, click on that. That takes you to this general page, which you can scroll down, and right at the top, it says click here in big bold letters. Click on that link, and that takes you to kind of the splash page, the intro page to this web map, a lot of logos here, a little basic information about the web map, and then enter. That takes you to this page here. You can choose which zone to view. I'm going to click on or zoom into Novato. And scroll in there and zoom in on some project polygons. So what you do to find out more about these vegetation management projects is click on a polygon, and that'll take you to a project page. It's just very basic information about the project in both English and Spanish, the name of the project, and a few before and after photos, and then a link to more information. And that takes you to the project webpage where you can get the environmental documentation, find out about field trips, etc. Those project web pages have been up for a long time. So this is just a really great way to make sure we're showing our work, make sure the public has somewhere to go to find out if there are projects going on in their neighborhood. And it's a really convenient public info tool for all of us. So I wanted to make sure that you knew how to find it. Also, a big thank you to member agency staff who helped review the language, provide photos for projects, etc. There will be plenty of updates to this web map as we go. So along with that effort has been a lot of communication with member agency staff on how to collect data as we're implementing vegetation management projects. So now we've launched a data collection program and app using Green Info Network and a lot of input from our member agencies to build this tool. We launched that in July, so the start of this fiscal year, and we've collected 1 quarter's worth of data at this point. We're now in the process of QA/QCing that data. And so this is huge. This is a big step forward in terms of being able to feed that data back into our tools and our models to really measure our success over time. That's going to take time, just as an FYI. I don't have that for you today. That's going to take a few months, and that's probably going to be an annual process. So we worked really hard to incorporate lessons learned from land management agencies to talk to member agency staff over the course of several months to develop this program in a way that balances, kind of the pie in the sky, let's measure everything versus what's really feasible and worth staff time and energy. So it started with conversations at the board level, the operations committee, and at the ATC in terms of how we want to report out our progress, our metrics, our objectives, and those conversations are still going. We have those defined, some of those defined for vegetation management, but not for everything that we do. So stay tuned. We'll have more conversations about some of those. But for veg management, got your input, the board's input. There was a working committee working on that with the help of Charlotte Jourdain and others. Talked to land management agencies, what works, what didn't work, what was a nice idea but didn't pan out in terms of data collection. Talked with our veg management staff at different agencies, member agencies, worked with Green Info Network, developed an app through field maps to collect that data in a really quick and efficient way out in the field. And then now we are, going through the process of making sure all of the data is consistent across all the different 17 member agencies and being able to use it now in modeling and reporting out on maps and calculating acres and miles and all of that. So that's really exciting. More work to do. We're going to incorporate photo points, and we're also thinking long-term. If there are any other things that we want to measure long-term, that would be useful for us and to tell our story. So what data are we collecting? Really fairly basic, but when the work was done. So for each polygon, the date, the cost, the polygon is, where it's located on the map and in the project area, what kind of vegetation was there, what kind of non-native species were there before and after. A lot of what we do, as you know, is removing broom and other invasives. And what kinds of activities. And then we're going to be adding photo points, so repeated location photos year after year where we can really track what these project areas look like over time. So that was a big lift. Another big thing that I wanted to get done this year was creating a shared drive for member agency staff. So just so you're aware, we've got a lot of different resources now available in a shared drive for staff to reference. I'm also asking staff to help contribute to that. So for example, tree ordinances in all of the different jurisdictions, herbicide ordinances in all the different jurisdictions. What should we all have access to and be aware of? All the different environmental compliance documents, all the contracting guidance, invoicing guidance for working with Measure C and Marin Wildfire. So that now has a centralized location. And so we're really excited to have that up and running. That's going to evolve over time. We're going to have a table of contents that we add to the resource. It should be a really useful resource for staff. Just two more items I want to mention. One is that we're going to be hosting the State Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force this next spring. So that is a big deal. We're going to bring a lot of attention and resources to our region to talk about what we're doing, bring a lot of statewide experts, people from all across the state will join, the heads of various state departments will join. And so we'll stay tuned. We'll be talking to all of you more about that. Mark has been working really hard on this. We're excited to bring attention to what's happening in Marin. And so that's going to be, the dates are here, March 27th and 28th. So take note. And then last, I want to note, we still are planning field trips, optimistically hoping for one in January. We'll see what the weather does. We hosted one to the Greater Novato Shaded Field Break October 22nd and had really great attendance. Made a lot of effort to invite the neighbors in the neighborhood and bring them out, show them what we're doing. We talked a lot about pile burning and what that looks like and what the process is. Worked with the Ecologically Sound Practices Partnership, Marin County Parks, Novato Fire, and others to plan. Fire Safe Marin helped out too to help plan this field trip, and we're doing another one in January on the 17th to focus on some work happening in Southern Marin. So also working with Marin County Parks, Southern Marin Fire, Ecologically Sound Practices Partnership. So more information about that will be coming soon. We're developing a flyer in both English and Spanish, and we'll be distributing that, and then also knocking on doors in the neighborhood to make sure that people know that it's happening in their neighborhood and are invited to attend. So that's the end of my report here. Happy to take any questions.
Do any members of the Ops Committee have questions for Ann? Yes, question.
Thank you. Thanks for your report, Ann. In regards to the shared resource list, are you asking for submissions now? For example, you used an example of a tree ordinance.
Yes. So for example, the Advisory Technical Committee, which is no longer a Brown Act committee, I can share those resources with the ATC and ask for their input. So I've sent an invitation for them to review certain documents, such as a list of tree ordinances. I sent that last week and would love their help in making sure that we have kind of a complete record of all the different ordinances that we should be aware of.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from ops members? I just have a couple quick ones. One is regarding the mapping project with the descriptions. Is the cost also included in that? Is that up as well? And for example, not just total cost of what the project is, but like cost per acre or something like that? I'm just curious.
In terms of the public facing webpage or the data collection for project
The public
implementation?
facing.
Cost information is not included in the public facing webpage. So it's something we could discuss if that's a priority, but currently cost is included in the work plan, but not in that location.
Okay. But you are tracking like cost per acre and things like that?
Yes,
needs- okay.
and so our data collection system, one of the entries for each, polygon, each piece of the puzzle that you're implementing is cost for that polygon.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. And then with regards to the data tools, are you going to talk a little bit more about the review of those tools and how that's going to be, is that in the committee reports?
Yeah, so then one of the next items on the agenda is talk about the work plan development process this season. And I'll be covering that at a high level to introduce the topic. We can talk about it. Can't take any action on any of that, but we can talk about it today. And I think we'll have much more information in January and February for this committee to discuss.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Do you want to add something?
Yeah, and if I
there's-
could just add a quick comment about the Wildfire and Forest Resiliency Task Force that we'll be hosting in March. As you may know, this is a task force that is basically housed by the California Natural Resources Agency, and the board of directors is chaired by the secretary of the CNRA. And like Ann said, the large players in this realm are all on that board of directors, whether it's U.S. Forest Service, Department of Interior, CAL FIRE, so on and so forth. They're all part of this. And they host annual meetings, or not annual, quarterly meetings. Every other meeting is at the CNRA headquarters in Sacramento, and then every other meeting is in one of the 4 zones that they have. And so we reached out and asked, hey, can Marin host your next zone-based meeting? And they jumped at the chance for that. And each of the zone-based meetings have a different flavor. And the flavor that they're looking at for Marin is the collaborative approach that we've taken here of our JPA, and not just our JPA, but how our JPA is interacting with our land management entities. And an observation that was made to me by the executive director of the task force is that out of all the counties in the state, in his opinion, we're the only county that has balanced forest health with wildfire prevention. Other counties have strived for that, but have not reached that. That was his observation to me. So that's very exciting that was their viewpoint, and that's the flavor that they want to make for the task force meeting. It's most likely going to be at the Marin Center in the exhibit hall, with also Embassy Suites serving as part of the hosting. And so you just have to cross the creek. One thing that they're looking at doing for this one that they've never done before is the night before, so Wednesday night, is have a keynote speaker to really talk about forest and fire resilience. And the audience that they're looking at for, or the type of speaker that they're looking at for this, is either the governor, Senator McGuire, or Representative Huffman. And so that's the level of the keynote speaker that they're looking to. Then Thursday is a series of different panel discussions with a resource fair that would be hosted by, we're looking at Fire Safe Marin bringing in the resource fair. But it's a tremendous networking opportunity. It's also an opportunity for all of our staff members of all of our member agencies to see what efforts other members of the state are doing, whether it's the actual on the ground efforts or the last meeting's focus really was on, guess what? Data collection and displaying that data collection through dashboards. So it was, it'll be really interesting or it'll be important for our staff members to see of our member agencies to see where other entities within the state are on these realms. And then day 2 of the task force meetings, when they go out to sites, are site visits. And the site visits won't just be in Marin only. We'll have site visits in other Bay Area counties, but we're really going to be looking at the opportunities to highlight the work that our folks have been doing. And then this is far from a done deal. There's another group that's out there called the Climate and Wildfire Institute. And it's got a similar mission to the Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force. Marin Wildfire staff had an opportunity to attend these meetings back to back. We went to the task force meetings one week and we went to the CWI meeting the next week. Task force meeting was very practitioner oriented. A lot of the people that are on the ground doing the work were there, with some of the science and data people attending as well. And then we went to the Climate and Wildfire Institute's meeting, and it was very, very heavy on academics, science, and data, and like 3 people that were practitioners in the meeting. And that disbalance and the unbalance and disconnect between the two was pretty striking. So Marin Wildfire approached CWI and said, "You are planning on having a spring meeting, right?" And they said, "Yeah, we are." And so we suggested, would you be willing to have that in Marin and have it the day before the task force and see if we can create some type of overlap and connection between CWI and the Forest and Fire Resilience Task Force. And so we have a meeting Monday to talk about being able to bring those two together. So that'll be a very busy week for us in March, but I think it'll be a very productive week. And so Monday, Tuesday would be CWI, or excuse me, Tuesday, Wednesday would be CWI with a keynote speaker Wednesday night, rolling right into Thursday, Friday. So pretty exciting times for, I think, to highlight the great efforts of our member agencies, Marin Wildfire and Marin.
Thank you for that inclusion in the report. Any other questions about that? Yeah.
Thanks, Chief. The events in March sound great. What's the week again?
It would be March 25, 26, 27, 28.
Okay, last week of March. Thank you.
Unfortunately, it's also the same week as the WUI conference, the International Association of Fire Chiefs WUI conference in Kansas. These were dates that we didn't have any control over.
Okay, if there's no other questions, let's go out to the public, see if there's any comment on that report.
If there are any members of the public wishing to comment, please raise your hand in the Zoom or press *6 to raise your hand if you're joining by phone. No questions.
Okay, thank you, Ann and Mark. Moving on to item number 6, consent calendar. Let's see, the opportunity for public comment on consent agenda items will occur prior to the committee's discussion of the consent agenda. The committee may approve the entire consent agenda in one action, and alternative items on the consent agenda may be removed by any committee or staff member for separate discussion and vote. So so let's first go, I guess, out to public comment. Sounds like.
If there are any members of the public wishing to comment, please raise your hand in the reactions or press *6 to raise your hand. No questions.
Okay, and so the only item looks like it's the meeting minutes. So hopefully you all got a chance to take a look at that. So I'm looking for any questions first about the minutes or edits. Okay, looking for a motion to accept the minute.
Mark Kenfield, move. Eric, second.
So we have a first and second on moving the consent calendar. We have to do a roll call, right? Okay. Roll call vote, please.
Bolinas Fire. City of Santa Fe.
Yes.
Kenfield Fire.
Yes.
Novato Fire,
Yes.
Stinson Beach,
Yes.
Town of Ross,
Yes.
Marinwood,
Yes.
Town of Corte Madera,
Yes.
Town of San Anselmo,
Yes.
Town of Fairfax,
Yes.
Okay, great. So that motion passes. Thank you. On to item 7, discussion items, and there's a 7A, development of the 2005-2006 work plan.
Great. And I will share my screen again. So in this item, we'll take a look at the season ahead for us. This slide is a review. I think most of you already are aware of this content. For anyone out there who's new to the Operations Committee, the Operations Committee ultimately will be recommending a draft work plan and budget to the board, and that'll happen in May. This committee generally meets December through early May each year to help develop a work plan and budget for the next fiscal year. We've got 17 voting members of this committee, and we generally meet approximately monthly. We've got a voting structure that includes a weighting according to population represented by member agency reps. And we also work very collaboratively with members of the Advisory Technical Committee, which formerly was a Brown Act committee, and due to changes in the JPA language that were adopted by our member agencies over the last several months, that committee will be function more as a working group. So rather than publicly posted agendas, we'll be meeting more internally to really brainstorm and think strategically and work through challenging issues and come up with ideas. And it'll function a little differently this year.
Hey, Ann,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt. I'm looking up at the screen there and it's got the little strike through on the, looks like the speaker part. Can they hear us?
I
in
hope
the-
so.
That's
I
just,
can hear you.
Okay,
that is just saying that the projectors are muted.
okay,
Mm,
gotcha.
So we-
Okay, thank you. Thanks for clarifying.
Got it.
Okay, I wasn't sure if we were,
Thank you.
please
Yeah.
proceed.
That would be a long, boring
Recording.
Zoom. Yeah. So, and if anybody's interested in reviewing the bylaws, they're available on our website. So I won't go into too much detail here, but we'll post these. I'll work with Martina to post these slides to our meeting archives so that they're available to all of you and the public as well. So this very dense slide is the overview for this season. So taking a look at big milestones and dates that we should be aware of as we're kind of planning for the next few months. I'll hit these as at a high level, and then again, we'll save these slides to the meeting archives so that you all have them and the public has them as well. So over the last few months, we've been working with member agencies to dive into tools that are available to help us make some interesting, informed science-based decisions according to our projects. We'll dive into that in a future slide. But that's the first item on the list here. In December, we spent time working with our contractor to update the web portal. That's our tool for proposing projects and programs for the next work plan. So that's in progress. The web portal is still kind of under construction right now. We'll probably open that up in January. We kick off the ATC and Ops in December of each year. And in January, we elect the chair and vice chair for each of those committees. So that's something for this committee to consider, and then we'll take action in January. We'll be communicating with ATC ad hoc from last year and those staff members, the ATC, about all those tools. I'll talk about that in a future slide, but those conversations are ongoing through January. This date here, January 15th, is one to keep in mind if you want to do work on public lands, national parks, state parks, county parks, Marin water. They all have internal deadlines to meet. January 23rd, that's our operations committee meeting in January, where we will need to elect a chair, vice chair, we'll want to take action on our overall strategy and guidance that you all worked on last year. We'll tackle that in another slide. February, March are really busy times. The ATC will meet February 6th. And again, March 6th, Operations Committee meets February 13th. And again, March 13th. This is when members of the ATC will be submitting project proposals. We'll be submitting JPA-wide proposals during this time. We'll also get a better idea for how much revenue we're going to be seeing in the next fiscal year under Measure C. So we use February to February Consumer Price Index data, and that's not released until March 13th. So that milestone is included in this timeline because it's very relevant. We'll want to have a really good idea for what JPA-wide proposals are going to be included in the work plan by mid-February. I've moved up that deadline to make things a little easier for budgeting for the core. And then we'll want to have a really good idea for zone-specific projects by mid-February or mid-March, and then the end of March for sure. So initial submittals by mid-March really kind of pencils down by late March because we need to start noodling through budget and how to balance all of that. And that's when the Operations Committee input is really, really critical. So April, we'll be working as a committee to really finalize those budget numbers and thinking through any questions about any of the proposals and how to balance all of that. And in May, on the 1st of May, the Ops Committee will need to make a decision on the draft work plan and budget and recommend it, or hopefully recommend it and not decide not to recommend it to the board for consideration. The board needs to take action May 15th to consider approval of the work plan and budget. So again, this slide will be available to you all to reference as needed. And I usually include it in each month's PowerPoint just to as a reminder of where we are in the process. This slide I included and also discussed with the ATC because it's so critical to work with our land management agencies very early in the process. If most of the land management agencies really want us to communicate in the fall and winter well ahead of the next work plan what we might want to do on public lands. By January 15th, that's kind of the drop dead deadline to get any ideas into the land management agencies because they have their internal processes, which are outlined here, but I won't go into in great detail. So to circle back to a conversation we had last year, and we spent a lot of time as a committee to really think through kind of overall strategic guidance for the work plan development process. I want to just remind you what we came up with last year and invite you to think about any potential edits. We won't take action today. We can revisit this and agendize it for January, but I wanted you to just be aware of what we came up with last year and think through any potential edits again. So continue the house out approach and then continue to reduce wildfire risk to communities by providing resources directly to residents for home hardening and D-space. Prioritize shaded fuel breaks directly adjacent to communities and explore potential for splats informed by pathways modeling. Expand the use of prescribed fire and public education around prescribed fire. Continue to prioritize evacuation planning and projects to improve safe and efficient evacuations. Partner with insurance companies and the IBHS to help avoid insurance cancellations and control costs for homeowners. And last, increase public education, particularly to new audiences, support activities that fire agencies and residents can take, such as home hardening, D-space, zone zero, safe evacuations, and reducing ignitions. So this is what we worked on last season, spent a couple of different meetings discussing. And so think about it and see if there are some edits that you'd like to see this year. So the tools that we've referenced already in this meeting, this group has seen, this committee has seen presentations on most of that content previously. But last year, we really made a commitment to dive into those tools in great detail with member agency staff and the ATC. So we have been doing that. We started regular meetings in September, would invite each of the consultants to really dive into one model at a time. Let's dig in, let's ask questions, let's figure out what the opportunities are, what the limitations are of each of the tools. No tool is perfect. Some tools are helpful. So we are diving in and thinking about how, the nitty-gritty of how each tool could be helpful for project planning, both for new potential projects and thinking through existing projects and how to maintain them, where to put your dollars, in a 60-mile shaded fuel break or a 38-mile shaded fuel break. Are there places that are more critical than others? So really diving into all of that. So we've been working on that September, October, November, December. Right now, kind of the next steps for our member agencies. These are folks that have been part of the ATC ad hoc subcommittee from last season, as well as other member agency staff. They've been invited to meet with individual consultants and dive into any of the tools that they'd like to explore, ask questions, test them out, and see how helpful they are. We're going to reconvene in January to discuss more at that group level, report out to the ATC, and report out to all of you. And we'll be looking for your guidance on, how you think that these are useful and how you'd like to see these get incorporated into the process. So more discussions to come. We don't have to take any actions today, but it's I just want you to know that it's coming. And I think it'll be a really interesting, robust discussion. So I want to also tie into that topic, revisit and just remind you that we'll be having conversations about that 20% priority funding. We've talked about this in previous years. This will be year 3 of discussing this topic. If you go back to the JPA language, section 9B, at least 80% of the revenue generated for vegetation management by each operational zone should be allocated within that respective zone. And just as an FYI, Mark has the numbers handy, but that's already happening. It's around 80% or more for each of the zones currently. So this 20% priority funding, the remaining 20% beyond that 80% in the JPA language presents an opportunity. It's an opportunity to think JPA wide. Are there places that that have risk and are not seeing the level of project planning that maybe we should be thinking about? It's an opportunity to collaborate, to think cross-jurisdictionally. And so we'll be, exploring that again this year. So what we recommend right now is, in terms of project planning, budget to the 80% in terms of the core projects, and then make some decisions about that 20%. And I think the conversations around the tools are going to be really critical to how we want to use that 20%. To remind you, previous years in the 23-24 work plan, we ended up providing West Marin with some additional funding because of the high regulatory costs, the low revenue generated, and the large land area in West Marin. In 24-25, we explored the tools sort of at the last minute. We decided that we didn't have kind of all of those baseline discussions in place yet on how to use the tools. So, what is bang for the buck? Is it number of residents who benefit? Is it flame length reduced? Is it number of miles where you see a risk reduction? What does that actually mean on the ground? So we wanted to have those conversations this year and really set ourselves up for success. So last year, in the end, you might recall, we decided to redistribute that 20% back to the zones to use as they see fit. This year, we've done a lot of homework to dig into those tools, and so we have more opportunity to have more discussions around how to use that 20%. So we'll be discussing that January, February, probably for quite a while. So one potential direction that we see, given that we have tools now that are further along and multiple tools that could potentially overlap, and you could see where they agree and provide some interesting insight landscape wide, is really looking at the JPA as a whole and where we might fill in some gaps in terms of project planning. So we'll be coming back to you for those conversations. But in the meantime, I'm going to continue working with staff, members of the ATC, and those consultants to dig into those tools, really test them out, try to break them, and figure out how useful they are for project planning. And then we'll be discussing at ATC and Ops, and then coming back to you for some direction. So last slide is just next steps for this committee. And then I'm going to ask Mark if he has anything that he'd like to add. But so we'll want to review our strategic guidance that you all came up with last year. We can take action on that in January. We can discuss a bit today, but can't take action today because it's not agendized. We'll want to consider chair and vice chair positions. I know at least our chair will be departing. And so we'll want to have those discussions and take action in January. This group is going to be receiving updates on those tools, how it's going, potential challenges and opportunities with those tools. So stay tuned. That will be agendized in future meetings. And then we'll also want to start talking about that 20% priority funding and what we'd like to see happen with that in terms of opportunities, how to incorporate that into the planning process. And we can discuss that a little bit today if you'd like. We can also wait until that's an agenda item in a future meeting, but we can't take action today because it's not on the agenda. So that was a lot of words spewing at you. Apologies for all of that, but hopefully that kind of sets the stage for a productive season. And that's my last slide. So I'll just invite you all to ask questions, discuss, and then Mark may have a few words.
Just two topics. One is on the development of our science-based tools. Most of the people that are drawn to this type of work are very visual. And so you guys are probably going, wow, you said a lot, but I can't see how this really is going to come together. And we talked about this massive map of bringing all these tools and overlaying all those tools and see where the intersections are. Then you start getting into the conversation of weighting. Wait, how much do we weight this priority? How much do we weight that priority? So we're finding that creating this one massive map may not be the best tool. However, and we haven't brought this to the subcommittee that's working on this, but when I saw it last week, I almost fell out of my chair. And that was where we did start to see a project outline and then some of the tools and an analysis that those tools were showing on the same map. And it was pretty valuable. So that's where Ann is talking about in January and February, being able to bring that back to the ATC after the subcommittee seen it, gave their thumbs up, then we can bring it to the ATC for them to see it, and then for you guys to see it. And it really starts to create that visual description. And then Ann talked about the 80% stipulation in the JPA, and this was part of our closeout for the Finance Committee at the end of the fiscal year. And this is a table that we've been able to develop that talks about where we are with the 80%. And as a background, remember year one, we practically had 0 core projects minus public education, chipper days, and red flag signs. Those were about our only core projects. And we purposely underspent close to $9 million. And the idea was to create a fund balance so that we can fund our work from July to December until we get our first tax revenue, right? And then year two, we did have a massive underspend because none of our member agencies, Marin Wildfire as well, had the bandwidth to spend that money. But we've committed that we want to spend that unspent money from year 2, year 3, year 4. So we've actually made a significant dent in spending that money because the taxpayers are giving us the money not to sit on it in a bank. The taxpayers are giving us that money to actually put work on the ground. So this table, to me, really highlights where our member agencies have gotten. So This column right here shows you what the JPA allocations are. It shows you based on the unspent revenue from previous years. This column is the unspent revenue from previous years. This is what we are looking to spend. This is what was spent in the zone and also what was spent as the JPA-wide allocations. And what we do with the JPA-wide allocation is that we know exactly how much was spent in each zone for chipper days, how much was spent in each zone for environmental compliance, how much was spent in each zone for grant program. And then so that creates this number. And you can see that every one of our zones spent more money last year than was they generated in revenue. This is the second year in a row that each of our zones were able to outspend their revenue, spending down that year two surplus that we created. And now if you look at the rolling average, the JPA stipulates that at the end of 5 years, all of our zones needed to hit that 80% target. You can see minus Southern Marin with only 1% behind, all of our zones have reached that 80%. So it's great work. And again, we're not supposed to be sitting on the money in the bank account. We're supposed to be putting this money into action. So I think this table really shows that we've done that. And it's hats off to all the member agencies, because it's the member agencies that are making this happen.
Okay, so that was a lot. Any, any questions? Yeah.
Thanks, Chief. Thank you for the report. Is there a place on the website that has a list and description of all the zone projects that have been received money? I know some of them are still underway or they're multi-year.
That have received Measure C money.
Uh-huh.
The work plans, which are available on the website.
So I would just look at the work plan for each fiscal year. It's not just a combined list. I would just look at each one.
I could work with finance staff and have that spreadsheet sent to you, though, if you'd like, but it's just not available on the website.
Okay, I'd like that, please.
You want to?
Just to piggyback that, I'm not clear on whether the tracking was done like on a per project basis versus, like whether it was core or whether it was, one of the other two.
Yeah, you bet. So when we close out the end of the fiscal year as part of the finance committee and then to the board, we actually have a project tracking spreadsheet where, and this is what Ann can share with you, but for what's in the board of directors packet is all the core projects. So a project tracking spreadsheet of every single core project since the inception of Marin Wildfire. You can see how much has been spent on each project, number one. Number two, we also have the same data for all the local and DSpace. It's just not part of the budget closeout for Marin Wildfire because those are pass-through monies to our member agencies, but that data is available as well. I'm happy to share it with you.
Through the chair, my interest is just to see what has been inspiration and just to see what's been happening in all the parts of the county. I'm not so interested. It doesn't have to be specific. I don't need to know all the money. I'm just interested. So I remember seeing something a year or two ago that was just describing all the LROD projects that were going on. And I thought that was interesting at the time. So I'm interested into seeing what everybody's doing more in their regions with MWPA funding.
For that, I think the executive summary that we create for each work plan would be the best place for you to go.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else? Questions? Okay, I have a few. All right, maybe this will spark some other conversation here. Let's see. One is before we set the new goals, or kind of the focus areas, if you will, strategic focus areas, will there be some sort of a report out on kind of what has occurred across those so that we can see whether or not we actually acted or affected on them? So for example, I know what I've done in my zone on a couple of them. like one, just for an example, one of the goals said, work more with insurance companies. I know there's been some debate about sort of at the board level about what that, there's nothing in our, mandate to do that. And yet we had identified that as an operations group as something important. And so, for example, one of the things that I did was asked by CSAA to do, to work on a project where they had architects from UC Berkeley, students that they gave some sort of an award if they could come up with, landscape plans that showed home hardening and how beautiful they could look, because most people think that, if you're gonna have a zone zero, it would just look really ugly and it would be like a clear cut thing. And so that's just one example. So I did that, worked with them, was one of the judges, and then did a video that sort of highlighted that in hopes that other insurance agencies would kind of do similar things to help get at the public's perception of what beautiful might look like in terms of a zone zero, blah, blah, blah. And, but I don't know what else everyone else has done. And so, how can I argue to try and have that kind of a focus if no one is doing it? And, or like to your point, I'd like to know, I'd like for inspiration, what other folks have done around that. So I think that might be helpful. I don't know if the group thinks that would be helpful to just kind of get a rundown on that. Just in general, it doesn't have to be super specific, but just in kind of certain things.
Yeah, we'd be happy to put something together for the January agenda. I think that's a great idea.
The other thing is, I know that last year we got into discussions about unspent amounts, and obviously we're going to come up with this work plan before we will know exactly what hasn't been spent. So there could potentially be funds that are able to be moved, over. So I don't think we ever really defined what that process of review would be. Like I know we did last, we had sort of a June kind of working group that kind of looked at that. So I don't know if that's the way you want to do that again, but I think it would be important to share that with everybody, going forward, right? Because there very well could be unspent funds, maybe not. Another sort of comment is on the 80-20, I know there was a lot of sort of discussion around that. The language that you showed up on there being, I think of it as no less than 80%. And it's sort of been interpreted in some areas as being that it's 80%, and then now we have opportunities with a holdout amount, and so we should be looking for plans on that. I have a different view on that. The recommendation was to just start your work plans with an 80%, cost in mind, and I would say people should be doing it at 100%. That way, if there are other projects that surface during that exploration of potential projects, that then if there is a clear process about how you would prioritize, that you have an idea about what you're giving up within your own zone in order to help this other project. And also to that point, we talked a little bit in that work group about, where are the big grants that we're asking for going, and can that help fill some of the gaps rather than hold out 20% to do the thing that we think is really important. But let's if it's really important, let's fund it through grants. Let's focus attention on that so the rest of the agencies can continue on the projects that they know are so important to their areas. So that's just a different way to look at that. And I don't think we ever really landed on that as a group. I remember Dan Schwartz was asking about that last time. He's not here today, but I would just say I think that there should be some continued robust discussions around that. I personally don't think an 80-20 thing exists. I think that it's the language is no less than 80. So people were worried about having too much leaving their zones, and that's why it said that. It wasn't set up as an 80-20 thing. From my participation in the past. So.
Can I just piggyback off of you on that? I just want to kind of echo kind of everything you just said around the 80-20. And I think from my vantage point now, coming in year 2, being on this committee, I think going through the process, letting our staff, budget to core at 100%, and then us having a conversation on what priority projects, if there are any, have that conversation, have some sort of clearly identified process and guidance to give to the ATC. Because I agree, I don't think it's something that, we have to hit 80%, but like if there's one project that comes up and maybe it's a 90-10 or something else, we at least have a little more flexibility. But having our staff start at 100% and then having that conversation on what do we have to give up or what are we going to have to adjust to in order to support whether it's a grant or some other priority project. So I just want to uplift that.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. Seeing, yep.
I don't disagree. I think with grants, it gets a little bit trickier, especially because a lot of these are kind of government funded grants, and just the application award process can be 6 to 12 months on its own. So it's almost like when you're going for a grant, depending on timing of the grant cycle, that might actually impact the following year by the time that actually gets awarded. They're just so long and drawn out. So you're saying, okay, we're 20% short, let's go get a grant. But that, depending when the cycle is, depending when the award is, you might have to look at that for, like I said, even the following fiscal year. So I don't disagree with what you're saying. But those are hard holes to plug. And then there's no guarantee on the grant funding because they've become so incredibly competitive over the last several years, really. So I don't know what the solution is, but I recognize that there's a challenge in that aspect of it as well, just from timing award to when you want to do the work, and can this work be stopped at this point and hopefully carried on with grant funding? Those are hard questions to answer until you know if you're awarded and then what the timing of that is. It's my only thought.
I have something to add too. As I think the only member of the West agency, we definitely benefited from one of that 20% in our last, not this year, but the previous year. So we're extremely underfunded out on the coast, and we have the burden of protecting a lot of the visitors, which is a lot of the visitors from member agencies coming out there, and we just don't have the structure count to bring those funds into the pool. So I guess what the contribution that I would like to add is to make sure that there is still opportunity for projects to do that. And then I don't want it to be divisive to this group to be able, we want to be able to bring those projects forward without thinking that we're taking away from some of the other member agencies. So that would be the only input I have is to make sure that there's still a welcoming atmosphere to be able to put forward some projects.
Okay, if there's no more questions or comments, can we go out to the public?
If there are any members of the public wishing to comment, please raise your hand in the reaction or press *6 to raise your hand if you're joining by phone. No questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so now we are into committee reports. 8A is Technical Advisory Committee.
And I'll provide the report today and invite the ATC to provide future reports. Just want to reiterate that the ATC will be now more of a working group rather than a Brown Act committee. And so we're also revisiting our bylaws. The bylaws were posted online. We pulled those, and now we're looking at revising those and creating more guidelines for the committee and how it's going to operate. And then as part of that, we'll determine who and how often we report out to the operations committee, for example. So stay tuned. We'll probably have either myself or the chair and vice chair of the ATC join in these meetings. But I think you've heard most of what happened in the last meeting, which is just going through similar content process timeline for now, and then January will be a much more meaty conversation with some of the member agencies who've been diving into use of the tools. That's it. Oh, go ahead, Mark.
I'm sorry, but I just want to add a little bit of the why behind making the ATC a non-Brown Act committee. And the benefits I think that we as the member agencies and Marin Wildfire and your staff's time will benefit from this. By having, first of all, it's going to increase collaboration, because if we started having in small group meetings, the number of people, the number of member agencies exceed 9 look at a single project, and we just created a serial meeting. And so some of our collaboration, especially in the Ross Valley and extending outside of the Ross Valley, we couldn't have the collaboration that we could have. And then we needed to have some very open and honest conversations, so we created ad hoc subcommittees. So there would be one ATC meeting a month and like 2 or 3 ATC ad hoc subcommittee meetings. And so that was impacting your staff's time. And so then we also wanted to bring in people that perhaps weren't part of the ATC into these conversations. And now, by making them a non-Brown Act committee, we've taken those constraints off of them. They can have the open and honest conversations. We don't have to have the ad hoc subcommittees that take up their time. And if we have a subject matter expert from one of our member agencies that needs to come in, we can just say, hey, come on in, we need you at this meeting. Also, that extends to the ops committee. If there's something that perhaps you guys want to send as a representative to one of the ATC meetings to help express the viewpoint of the ops committee, you can now do that. So I think we're going to be able to figuratively or literally roll up our sleeves with the ATC. We may even be able to set up the meeting space in here that a working group is going to work on a project over here. A working group is going to work on a project over here. We're not going to be bound by this stuffy formal committee processes. So I'm actually pretty excited about what we can get out of this.
Are you
Yeah.
calling us a stuffy formal?
I'm calling Brown Act meetings stuffy.
Thank you, Mark. One other thing I'd add to that is, even in the work plan portal, we had to make sure that no staff from one zone could see what the other zones were proposing. It was very siloed, and I think was really counter to the original intent of this technical working group. And so we're hoping that this new structure will increase collaboration. A lot of the same, so each month last year and in previous work plan development seasons, the same presentations would take place at the ATC, and then they'd happen again at the operations committee. They were the meetings were carbon copy almost of each other. And so it wasn't really a benefit to the public in terms of transparency. All of those same conversations are going to happen in the public sphere here at the operations committee. And so the public has the opportunity to be part of the process and listen in and hear all of the same information. They just won't hear it twice. So I think that it's going to lead to a lot more collaboration and conversations across different jurisdictions this season. And so that's really exciting. So we're excited about the new format.
Bill, so you know, Dan Schwartz, who has been attending as a member of the public, raised his hand, so we can bring him in. I think he has something to say.
He has raised his hand?
Yeah.
Okay. So
Fire away, Dan.
this is,
Oh,
well,
sorry.
hold on
Oh,
one
sorry,
second.
Bill.
So is there any, first of all, is there any questions from our group here about the Technical Advisory Committee? Okay, and I just to clarify, then I understand that there was a series of meetings where the ATC representatives got a chance to view all of the tools and begin to understand about what goes into them and how to interact with those. And then you also met to be able to kind of help them figure out how to integrate one or more of the tools into the next work plan. Is that correct?
That's largely correct. I'll just note, because of the Brown Act, because the ATC was previously Brown Act, it wasn't the entire ATC, it was the ATC ad hoc subcommittee. So now that the ATC is no longer Brown Act, I'm inviting them to view the tools and the recordings and, all of the different pieces of information and bring them all into the process as well.
Can you just name the tools? I think there's like 6 of them or something, just so everyone here can hear what they are.
Sure, I can list off what we've looked at. Scott Farley with Willow Labs has been working on a risk assessment for shaded fuel breaks. So looking at vegetation management within shaded fuel breaks and calculating that. He's been looking at pathways analysis. So looking at how fire moves across the landscape, where it's likely to move the most quickly and enter residential areas, for example. We've been looking at on-parcel risk assessment. So using all that great data that's collected through Fireside and the home hardening D-space inspections and looking at heat maps there in terms of risk. We've been working with Vibrant Planet too, who's kind of the newest on board. Vibrant Planet has been a really active partner with CAL FIRE and with other agencies developing CWPPs around the state. So they're also a key player in this realm. They have a platform that looks kind of more generally at risk, and it's a very easy to use interface with different ways to weight different variables on the landscape. So that's an interesting component. And then we've been working with STI on the evacuation risk assessment. So looking at risk along all the different roadways and then how to prioritize, roadside vegetation management using that tool. So some of the work happening now is meeting with those individual entities and really digging into how to use those tools or what questions to ask of those tools.
Okay.
Did I miss
So
anything?
I find that to be incredibly fascinating and important. And for example, if you watch the fire that they had down in Ventura County, there was pathways, analysis that was done showing how it came off the hill, and where it would run. And it just looks like little tributaries of where water would run. And the idea there is to look at where those are and then potentially do a project in an intersecting area where, you can perhaps, if you have prioritized money to spend, you do it there because it'll have the best impact of that in combination with getting resources to the scene. You could potentially stop a fire from really impacting a large area immediately. So super exciting. And that's the kind of thing that they're going to try and integrate into the plans, which I think is very cool.
Quick question, Chief. Ladris AI, I know we invested in. Is that part as well?
That is, but we felt that we haven't got to the level of maturity with that product yet to bring that in as part of these tools. We do have a large scale evacuation drill that's going to include the Southern Marin area, Mill Valley, Throckmorton Ridge, Tam Junction, and Ladris AI is going to be a partner in that. And then we believe after that exercise and the use of Ladris AI in that exercise will bring us up to the point where we can now incorporate that into the rest of the organization.
Thank you.
Yeah, quick question. Any other questions or comments? Okay, let's go out to public.
That me now?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Bill, everybody. I was in another Zoom meeting where I had to be in a different location, so I'm sorry I couldn't be with you today. I was glad I could log in. I applaud the staff for working to reduce barriers created by the Brown Act. I do want to remind the staff and the committee that when we drafted the JPA, we were trying to create a system to ensure that professionals reviewed all concepts and projects before they reached the board. And in addition, there was a lot of discussion making sure that all the agencies, member agencies, were equally represented in the processes that percolate the ideas up to the board. So as you revisit the bylaws, I heard Ann say that you're visiting the bylaws now with respect to how these ideas are going to go forward. I think it's all the more imperative that those bylaws say some things that come out of the ATC have to go through the operations committee, because if they circumvent the operations committee, you can't actually meet those two critical agreements when we founded the agency. And those two agreements were really critical to building the trust to get it passed. So I would just say the ideas out of this new non-Brown Act compliant ATC should all come to the Ops Committee.
Yes, nothing in that process would change. The Ops Committee will see all the projects and proposals that would come out of member agency staff and members of the Advisory Technical Committee. So that process will continue.
Before they go to the board, though, like what I get concerned about is if you undo the reins, you're going to have people taking stuff up to their board members too quickly and politicize decision making.
Yeah, we're on board. Yeah. Yeah, we're on board with you, Dan. We are creating standard operating guidelines and bylaws that pretty much mirror what the JPA language said, and we even put in the voting structure of the weighted voting structure as before, and that the process still continues to go through Operations Committee before it goes to the board. So we're fully on board with you, Dan, and we are getting it documented just outside of the JPA language itself.
All right, great. Thank you.
Chief,
Yes.
just a question. So if and when the ATC changes their bylaws, will those come to the Ops Committee for approval?
The ATC would be creating their own guidance documents. I'm happy to present it to the Operations Committee, though, if you'd like. Yeah. Great.
Any other questions or comments from the public?
I see no raised hands at this time.
Okay, so the recommendation was just to receive the committee report. So can I get a motion?
Yeah.
No? Okay. All right. Moving on then to number 9, committee members' requests regarding future agenda items. Does anybody have any future agenda items? Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably something that could go in the operations report. Last year, we had heard and was discussed about putting together a report, kind of a inventory and current status report for all the fire roads in the county. Would love an update on where that project is, if it is anywhere, I don't know, but that would be great.
Anybody else? Okay, so I just had a couple just to make you aware of the group aware. We are about to receive local responsibility area maps from the state, and my understanding is that's supposed to happen in January, and then there's a process where each agency is supposed to be involving the public in comment, as you then have to adopt those maps. The last time this was done was like in 2000. No, I think it was after that, 8 or 10, something like that. So it's been a really long time, and a lot's happened. A lot's happened since then, and I think we all saw that the SRA maps for the fire hazard severity zone maps, those ended up with a lot greater hazard ranking across California. I'm interested to see whether or not if any of the grants for work that was done in our areas is ending up being reflected in those maps with a reduction in hazard. I think that would be very interesting to see. But I'm just, I don't know whether this group wants to talk about in the future, those maps, number one. I believe once we get them, there's a certain number of days that we have in order to like reply back and out for the public or whatnot. So it would be, now that we have the MWPA, and before we didn't, it gives us an opportunity to sort of think through standardizing our approach to those maps, an opportunity. So I don't know if this is the right place to do it, but this could be the right place to sort of talk about some of that.
I would support that for sure, because I think that especially the intersection of the hazard maps and land use decisions as well, and some consistency around that, I think would be helpful, or at least some sharing of knowledge around the implications of those maps on density and housing and things like that. I don't know if it's directly within the purview of what we're
sort of acting on, but I think from a standpoint of just information sharing, it would be helpful. So I'd support that.
Yeah, because I mean, this committee has got fire chiefs on it, has elected, has city managers and whatnot. It's a good, solid group. And it seems to me that if we have some understanding about what we're all doing, we could, share that or even make a recommendation up to the full board, because then those are the elected officials that go back to their home agencies then to do the adoption, right? There's an interesting opportunity to kind of have that think tank, if you will. So that was one. Another one I thought about adding similarly is it's going to be a code adoption year next year. And so starting in July of 25, all of the cities, towns, fire agencies, districts, county will be adopting a new fire code and will be adopting WUI codes because of the change in how the codes are being set up. And this is another opportunity for all of us to get a look at and talk about that so that we could make recommendations potentially up to the MWPA elected officials about how to do those adoptions, right? Because one of the nice things is we're very similar, just from my background, in the prevention world. They're very, very similar, remember, but they're not the same. And there's potentials for, especially with zone 0 requirements coming in, which we have identified as a important focus for us to be supporting zone 0. The implementation of that and where that would occur, is it, for example, will it only be in SRA because that's what the state requires in certain hazard, or do we extend that into our designated wildland urban interface areas, our WUI areas, which are different than the fire hazard severity zone maps? There is overlap, but they're different. And at least to have a conversation here between fire chiefs, city managers, and others to make a recommendation potentially up to elected officials. This is, especially the zone 0 is going to be very difficult to make that paradigm change for people. And so I think that it's worth a discussion. It's worth trying to see if we can, reach some sort of consensus and then, help leverage decisions that our elected officials might make. We all have our own sort of thing, but if we can see where others are as it kind of builds, it could be helpful across the board. There's been different approaches, but that could be a topic that we add on, just an overview of code adoption, time frame, what we think is coming, and including zone 0. I think that would be an interesting thing. And then lastly, I don't know if any of you would like to go into this kind of detail, but the naming of the tools with the short description that you just gave, I think is all those things are so powerful in the way they can just energize our work plans and demonstrate the community that we're doing the best thing that we possibly can with the resources we have. I don't know if this group wants to get a little more in depth about what those tools are and how they might be integrated into the next work plan. So that's something, before we say what the work plan is, we could get a little more. We know ATC has that down cold, right? But some of us may be scratching our heads about what is that tool and how would that work? So I just see that as something that might be interesting to this group. So those are my proposed adds to a future meeting agenda. Okay. I think that's it.
Chief,
Yeah.
may I just add on to your comments about about 0 zones? So for example, we are in Ross doing a general cleanup to our municipal code for many reasons, but during this staff process where we're getting together every month just to keep on moving forward is our tree ordinance. And so we're going to be looking to amend our tree ordinance so it takes into account 0 zone, because right now we're, making people pay up or not cut or do in lieu when they want to take out trees even next to their house. So we need to adjust that. So, or rather that we're incentivizing people to do that. So that would be something that we could put into the resource after we're done with it. We can put into the resource shared resource drive. So nice.
Okay, so do we have to go to public on that? No? Okay. Good. So we're at adjournment then. So fantastic. What time is this here? 11:25, right? So we're adjourned 11:25. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.